Good morning, Molly. It's Mrs. Jansen, and I wanted to say Happy New Year. I hope you had a wonderful break. It is really good to be back here with you today, and we are going to be working on some winter landscapes. And I'm excited to be working on these because it finally looks like winter outside. So I hope you still have a little bit of snow outside your window um, when you watch this. I am making this while there is still snow outside. So we are going to be doing a landscape that we'll be painting and doing a little bit of collage because our white background will be gluing. But we are going to create a sense of perspective with our tree landscape. And so what you can see here in this example from Mr. Warner is we want you to get the sense that as we look in our picture, this tree is farther away than this tree. So these trees are up close and we have them bigger, and then off in the distance is this one in the background. So we will be talking about that as we work on our winter landscape. This is a project that's just a lot of fun, but it also will take, we'll have to take breaks in between because our paint is going to have to dry before we can add more to it. So you'll work on this maybe for 15-20 minutes, and then you're going to have to let it dry, pause the video, and then you'll come back and we'll do the rest of it together. So the supplies that you are going to need today: you are going to need the gray sheet of paper. You will need your white paper. Yours won't have a coffee stain on it, but you will need that. You will need a glue stick. You're going to need the paint that I sent you. I have a paint palette now, but you can just use a paper plate if you want. And you're going to be setting your paints. You can just use them in the little containers that I gave you. But you should have brown, green. I don't have my white out yet, but we will also be using white. You need a container of water. You will need the little sponge that I sent home and one paintbrush. Probably this one's pretty big, but you can use a medium. And those are all the supplies that we will be using today. So the first thing that we're going to do is a little bit like the pumpkin landscapes that we did. These are just basically, we're making the pumpkin landscapes, but we're making them with a winter scene. So we have our sheets of paper. I would say let's fold it in half again, so that'll give us kind of a sense of where we're going to start ripping. You don't have to press too hard. We just want to have, we're going to be gluing that to the bottom of ours. So starting where you folded it in half, I'm just going to kind of rip it. Now, I don't want it to be even. So you can see I went over the line here, but I also don't want this to go all the way to the bottom. So I'm just going to kind of control how I rip it. Ooh, I've got a really bumpy one, you can see. So we're going to set this aside, and my paper, I actually have a sheet of paper that was from my house, not from school, so it doesn't match the same size as the white. So when I line up my corners here on the white and the gray, mine doesn't come all the way across. So I'm just going to take a little bit off here, and I'm going to rip. I might add a little bit there, but I'm going to rip from here, and I'll be doing a layered gluing. After you get that, you're going to go ahead and you're going to take your glue, and we're going to flip this over. And we're going to put glue on this, and we are going to attach it to and match the corners of our gray sheet. So if you remember our pumpkin ones, we did the same thing. We ripped the paper. We were going to have our pumpkin field. I don't want there to be quite so much of a difference, so I'll leave this, but I'm just going to layer in some of my extra paper that I've ripped. So this is going to be the base or the horizon line where our sky meets the ground. I know you're getting good at this, Molly. I've seen so many of your beautiful pieces of artwork. So I'm going to put my glue away, move my extra paper. All right, so you can see with Mr. Wanners, we've just done this part. The next thing we want to do is we want to put in, he's got 4 trees, so I'm thinking we want at least 4. You could maybe do 5, like another one back here. So I'm going to leave this kind of up front. We are going to be putting in the trunks of our trees first. And pine trees can sometimes feel like they're hard to paint. But there are some of my favorites. So we're going to just be putting in straight lines for our trees, and it's important to notice that they're different heights. So this tree is taller than this one, so we're going to make a little bit longer lines. And this one is just very small because, again, when we look at items or objects, when they're farther away, they appear smaller. So, and then this one's a good size. What I would like you to do is get your paintbrush wet, and then you kind of want to squeeze out most of the water, but you want your bristles to be wet so they're all together. I'm going to go in to the brown paint. Again, this is tempera paint. So if yours dried up for some reason, you just add water to it. I just squeezed it out of the bottle. So I actually have, mine's really wet. But if I just add water to it, it will work again. So we're going to put our first trunk in. So I'm going to do this one. This one's going to be up front. It's going to be pretty close. So I'm going to have it, you can see the edge of my paper. It's up a little bit farther, so it's not right in front, but it's going to be pretty close. Now you can see with one line, I didn't get it quite thick enough. So make it a little bit thicker so it appears a little closer. So that'll be our first one. This paint is a little translucent, which means you can see through it. So we'll see how it dries. We've got the one. I'm going to do my second one lower down to the edge. So this one I'm going to make a little bit wider, like it's really close. Do my line in it. And you can put yours wherever you like on your paper. That's how it's going to look different from mine. And again, you can see I just keep dipping my paintbrush in the paint and adding that. Now you can see I spilled or dropped some little spots of brown. If I try to wipe them, they'll smear everywhere, so I'm just going to leave them. That happens, and they'll dry, and they'll be fine. Okay, so back here, I'm going to go closer to the horizon line, so this tree appears smaller, and I'm going to do a much shorter line. And sometimes it's hard at this point because we're just putting in these lines to tell what we're doing. And I'm going to do one right at the edge too, right at the edge. And there we go. And that one's going to even be shorter. So this one will be, they're near each other, but we know this one's farther away. And then I'll do one more over here. And this one I am bringing closer to the edge of the paper, but I'm not going to make so tall or big. And again, if you have to, repeat it by going over it. We have our paint on there. Now my brush still has quite a bit of paint, so I'm just going to use that up by putting it on the thin parts of the lines I already drew. And then any leftover I can just put back into the paint palette, and then I'll clean my brush. We cannot do any more of our painting until this part dries. You need to pause this video or take a break, and when these are dry, it might be in a half an hour or maybe tomorrow, whenever you have time, you're going to come back and we will work on the next part of our painting. All right, Molly, hopefully your tree trunks are dry so we can go on to the next part of our painting. So you can see you're going to need, and this is kind of messy because I was working on another project video for the second graders where we were using green as well. So you should have your green and you can pull out your yellow. If you have a paper plate, you can, you want to use both of those because we'll mix them a little bit to make a lighter green. You also will need some white. You probably don't need any more of your brown, and you won't have to worry about the blue. You don't need blue. You're going to want to grab all of your supplies. You should have your container of water available. You need to have a brush, and you'll have your paper towel off. I want to remind you what we are working on. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to add the green branches and pines, and then after we do that on all the different sized trees we have, we are going to go ahead and use our sponges, and we're going to stamp textured snow on top. Now you can see we have some snow that's on top of our green, so we're going to have to wait in between again. We'll put our green on, then we'll take a break and we're going to let it dry, and then we'll go ahead and do, for the last part, do our snow. You're going to take your brush. I'm going to take a separate clean brush so I don't get my white paint dirty, and I am just going to go ahead and put that off to the side. This I'm just going to clean. I just used it kind of like a little shovel or spoon to pick up some of the white paint. I'll let that paintbrush sit on my paper towel to dry, but I'm going to add just a little bit of water, a little bit of white to my paint. This also makes the paint, so it lightens it up, the green, but it also makes it a little bit more what we call opaque. That means that it's not see-through. So as I add some of the green paint that I already have on my palette, it still will be lighter because I'm adding it to the paint that has the white and the yellow. And that just makes a really nice color to work with. So you can kind of play around with your paint. I've got a decent amount mixed up, but that's good because I have a lot of trees to work on. Now I might be using, I've got this paintbrush that I'm currently using is pretty thick and big, and I like that because I've been mixing this green paint. But if I push it on the side, you could do it on the side of your paper plate, you can get some of that paint off of your brush. You don't want it to be so thick that it's just getting everywhere. I will most likely be using a smaller brush for my trees over here. We're going to start at the top, and we're just going to be making lines, basically diagonal lines that pull down from where we start. Put a drop of green on the trunk, and then I just pull out. And as I work on that, every time I pull them out, I want them to get a little bit wider and longer so that the branches of my trees make the tree feel fuller. And I just keep scooping up a little bit of paint and pulling it out. Now the green paint looks slightly different. as we do it on the white background versus the gray background. Now this tree is pretty close to this one, so if it overlaps, this one is lower down on the paper. So we're saying it's closer to us, so it would cover up. It would cover up that tree. So it would be the one that's in front. I'm going to use this same brush. Before I do that, I'm going to take this brush that I have here, and I'm going to kind of shovel up the paint that I dropped. Now when we did it with the brown, we just left it because they were so small. This was such a big spot that I decided I don't really want that big green spot, and that'll be harder to hide. So I'm just gently scooping that up. So it's once it dries, that'll go light again, and I can put one of my snowflakes on top of that. Okay, so I still have my really big brush. I'm going to kind of scooch my painting over here so you can see it. And I am going to do the same thing on this tree that's up close. If you would smear your brush around a lot on the tree trunk, it would get the paint wet again and it would mix with your green. So you just want to be careful not to mix it, to spend too much time brushing over the top. So I'm gonna go over my trunk over here just a couple more times, just so that it doesn't stand out so much. So I am going to clean this brush because I think this brush is just too big for my little trees, my trees that are farther away in the distance. So I'm going to fully clean my brush, and I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to wipe it because there was still a little bit of paint on the metal. I'm going to set that aside, and I'm going to use my smaller brush. Now the paint is already mixed, so I can just pick up the paint that I have. And again, I will do exactly what I did for the trees that are closer. So you can kind of see how we go from this one's really up close, that's behind it, this is overlapped it. This one is about the same distance, but this one appears to be farther away. And we're going to go ahead and do that right back here. But this one should be, the green should be even a little bit smaller than this one. So go ahead and look at your trees. If there's any area that you think needs a little bit more paint, this would be the time to kind of scoop it up. We're going to clean off this second brush. We're going to set our paint palette aside, and we are going to let these pine trees completely dry. And when they are dry, we do add our stamped snow. So I will see you in just a little bit. All right, Molly, we are back with our dried pine tree painting. And you can see actually a couple of my spots are still a little bit wet, but that's okay because we are mostly just going to be putting snow, stamping snow snowflakes in the sky. I want to just remind you one more time kind of what that looks like. We will be spacing out our stamps in the sky, and then we also will include some of those on top of the trees. You want to grab your palette, which should have some white. So if you need to get some of your white out, you can go ahead and do that. And you're going to want your sponge. Now, I'm going to actually add just a little bit of water to my white because it's been sitting out for a little while, so it's kind of dry. Just add a little bit of that. I'm going to be dipping it in. This is why this might be better if you have your white paint on a plate rather than in a palette. So this is the fun part, Molly. We're just going to go ahead and put some snowflakes in. You can see that my first one from dipping in was very heavy and thick, but as I keep printing them, they get lighter. I like how they get lighter because that feels a little bit more like snowflakes. Now you can see that second dip, I didn't get enough paint in the center, so just want to make sure I push my sponge in really well. I'm just kind of looking for some spots where they maybe need a little bit of a snowflake. Because these trees are farther away, we want their snowflakes to look a little bit smaller. So I'm going to try just dipping the corner of this into the white and just doing some smaller, just a couple smaller. And I'll put some of those throughout so they kind of look like they're farther back. And there you have our snow pine tree landscape. So it'll be clean, mostly clean. Keep that around because we'll be using this later, and so I'll just send this one home this week, and then you keep that with your art supplies for the future. I think the very last thing, other than putting our name on it, I'm going to take a little bit of that brown paint. I'll bring it over here. Take a little bit of that brown paint that I have left, and if it's all dried up, you just add a little bit of water, and I'm going to put some shadows behind our trees. So I'm painting it like that we have light coming this way, and it's causing a little bit of a shadow to fall back. And that shadow touches the base and it goes out. So you can clean that brush. Then you want to take a pen or pencil or a Sharpie marker, and in the corner, I always like to do it on the right, just put your initials or your name. Well, Molly, I hope you had fun making a winter pine landscape and showing that some of our pine trees are farther away. I look forward to seeing yours posted on Seesaw, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.